Askeladd died the only way he could, by choosing the manner of his own execution. He orchestrated his death with the same precision he used to orchestrate every betrayal, every ambush, every calculated massacre across 2 decades of warfare. He forced Canute to kill him, and in doing so, gave the prince the one thing he needed most, the will to become a king. But that death was never inevitable. It was a choice made in a single moment of clarity. What if that moment never came? What if the variables shifted just enough that Askeladd saw a different path forward? What if he survived the throne room, walked out of that castle, and continued to operate in the shadows of Canute's rule? The answer isn't redemption. It isn't loyalty. It's something far more corrosive. Because Askeladd, alive, doesn't serve Canute. He owns him. And a king who can be owned is not a king at all. He's a puppet with a crown, dancing on strings held by a man who spent his entire life perfecting the art of turning idealism into leverage. The throne room. King Sweyn lies dead. Canute stands paralyzed, having just killed his own father, but unable to process what comes next. Askeladd is bleeding out, Thorfinn's blade still lodged in his body. In canon, this is where Askeladd completes his final play. He insults Canute's bloodline, forces the prince to execute him, and dies, cementing Canute's transformation. But what if Thorfinn's strike wasn't as deep? What if the blade missed the fatal organs by inches? Askeladd collapses, but he doesn't die, not immediately. Canute's guards move to finish him, but Canute raises his hand, stops them. Because in that fraction of a second, Canute makes a calculation. Askeladd just killed the king to save Canute's life. That action, however violent, however treasonous, was the most valuable gift anyone has ever given him. And Canute is nothing if not pragmatic. He orders Askeladd taken to the infirmary, orders the room cleared, orders the official story written. King Sweyn died of sudden illness. Askeladd was gravely wounded defending the prince from an assassin, Thorfinn, who will be executed at dawn. Thorfinn is dragged away. Askeladd is carried out on a stretcher, barely conscious, blood pooling beneath him. In the moment those doors close, something shifts in the architecture of power itself. Because Askeladd's death was meant to be liberation, his survival is a chain that will never break. Askeladd survives. Barely. He spends 3 weeks in and out of consciousness, fevered, delirious, tended to physicians who've been ordered to keep him alive at any cost. When he finally wakes, the first thing he sees is Canute sitting beside his bed. Not standing, sitting, waiting. And Askeladd understands immediately what this means. Canute needs him. Not wants, needs. The prince has seized power in the chaos following Sweyn's death, but his position is fragile. The nobles don't respect him. The commanders don't fear him. He has the crown, but not the infrastructure to keep it. Askeladd is that infrastructure. Their first conversation is brief. Canute doesn't thank him, doesn't express gratitude or relief. He simply asks, "Can you stand?" Askeladd's answer is a thin smile. "Eventually." "Then you'll serve as my strategist. Publicly, you're a loyal commander who saved my life. Privately, you'll do what you've always done. Ensure I remain in power." Askeladd should refuse, should recognize this as the trap it is, but he's bleeding, weakened, and surrounded by Canute's guards. More than that, he's curious, because the boy sitting beside him isn't the frightened Prince Ragnar anymore. This is someone new, someone calculating enough to turn patricide into an opportunity, someone who learned from watching Askeladd operate. And that fascinates him far more than freedom ever could. 6 months pass. Askeladd recovers, though the wound leaves him with chronic pain and diminished mobility. He can't fight, not the way he used to, but he was never just a warrior. He was an architect of chaos, and now he has the tools to build something even more dangerous: a kingdom. He operates from the shadows, exactly as Canute intended. No official title, no public position, just a strategist who whispers in the king's ear during council meetings, who drafts treaties that other men sign, who identifies threats before they materialize and eliminates them through proxies. On the surface, Canute seems to be thriving. He consolidates power rapidly, absorbing rival factions, negotiating peace with Saxon lords, positioning Denmark as the dominant force in England. The court sees a young king coming into his own. The commanders see someone who understands warfare. The people see stability after years of chaos. None of them see the strings. Because every decision Canute makes, every alliance he forms, every enemy he crushes, it all flows through Askeladd first. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Canute begins to defer to him. Not out of weakness, out of efficiency. Because Askeladd's plans work, his strategies deliver results, and in the brutal calculus of kingship, results matter more than autonomy. But this creates a pathology. Canute starts to doubt his own judgment, starts to second-guess instincts that contradict Askeladd's advice. He tells himself it's temporary, that once the kingdom is secure, he'll reclaim full control. But security never comes. There's always another threat, another crisis, another situation that requires Askeladd's particular expertise. And Askeladd knows this. He's engineered it this way. Because the moment a ruler stops trusting himself, he becomes fundamentally controllable. Thorfinn was executed the morning after Sweyn's death. Publicly, efficiently. A necessary sacrifice to legitimize the official narrative. Except, he wasn't. Askeladd, even half dead in that infirmary bed, left instructions. Thorfinn was to be kept alive, imprisoned, hidden. Not out of sentimentality. Askeladd doesn't operate on sentiment, but because Thorfinn represents leverage, a weapon that might be useful later. A reminder that even in weakness, Askeladd plans 3 moves ahead. For 2 years, Thorfinn rots in a cell beneath the castle. No trial, no execution, just existence in a stone box, fed barely enough to survive. And the worst part, the part that breaks him more than the confinement, is that nobody comes for him. Not Askeladd, not Canute, not even to gloat. He's been erased. In canon, Thorfinn's slavery was brutal, but it had a purpose. He was building something, working towards a tangible goal. But this imprisonment is pure void. No redemption arc, no moral awakening, just time dissolving into madness. When Askeladd finally visits him, Thorfinn is barely recognizable. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, shaking with a rage that has nowhere to go. Askeladd looks at the bars and feels nothing. No pride in what he created, no guilt for what he destroyed, just cold assessment. "I thought about letting you go," he says, "releasing you into the world to see what you'd become. But then I realized you're more useful here, as a reminder of what happens when someone acts on instinct rather than calculation." Thorfinn lunges at the bars, screams something incoherent. Askeladd watches for a moment, then walks away. He never visits again. 3 years into Canute's reign, the cracks begin to show. Not in the kingdom,
Externally, everything appears functional, but in Canute himself, he's become dependent on Askeladd's counsel to the point of paralysis. He can't make significant decisions without consultation, can't trust his own instincts, and worse, he's starting to recognize the pattern. During a private meeting, Canute confronts him. "You were supposed to be temporary, a resource until I established control, but you've made yourself permanent. Every time I act independently, I find myself questioning whether it's the right move. You've turned me into a puppet." Askeladd doesn't deny it, doesn't deflect. He just looks at Canute with that same calculating gaze he's used on 1,000 battlefields. "You are a puppet," he says. "Every king is. The only question is whether you're held by advisors you trust or by forces you don't understand. I've given you stability, expanded your territory, secured your rule. Your father couldn't have achieved a fraction of what you have, and you resent me for it? I resent that I can't function without you. Then learn, or accept that some men are meant to rule, and some are meant to think. You're good at the former, I'm better at the latter. That's not weakness, it's division of labor." But Canute knows that's not true. He's watched Askeladd long enough to understand that this isn't partnership, it's occupation. Askeladd hasn't just infiltrated his rule, he's replaced the foundation beneath it, and removing him now would cause the entire structure to collapse. Canute is trapped, not by force, not by threat, but dependency he allowed to form because it was easier than learning to rule alone.
5 years after Svein's death, something changes in Askeladd. Not a deterioration, a completion. He's no longer operating with the manic energy that defined his younger years. No more risky gambits, no more improvisation, just cold, mechanical execution of power. He's become the thing he always despised, a court functionary, a bureaucrat of violence, and he's bored. One evening, he and Canute sit alone in the strategy room, reviewing reports from the frontier. Canute is exhausted. Years of rule have aged him prematurely. Askeladd looks the same as always, just grayer, more scarred. Canute asks the question he's been afraid to voice for years. What happens when you die? Askeladd pauses, sets down the parchment he was reading. The kingdom fractures within 6 months. Your commanders will vie for influence, the nobles will test your authority, and you'll be forced to make the kind of brutal decisions I've been making for you, except you'll hesitate, and that hesitation will cost you everything. Then why not train someone else? Why not ensure continuity? Because no one else would do it the way I do. You just end up with a different master. At least I'm competent. Canute stares at him, and in that moment, he understands the full horror of his situation. Askeladd isn't holding him hostage. He's holding the entire kingdom hostage. And the worst part? He's right. Everything Askeladd built would collapse without him. Askeladd dies 7 years after the throne room. Not from an assassin, not from battle. From an infection in the old wound that never fully healed. He spends his final days in bed, calm and lucid, giving final instructions to Canute. How to handle specific nobles, which commanders can be trusted, where the kingdom's vulnerabilities lie. Canute listens, takes notes, tries to memorize everything. The night before Askeladd dies, Canute asks him something he's never dared to ask. Did you ever regret it, killing my father, forcing me into this? Askeladd considers this for a long time. Then he answers with perfect honesty. No, I gave you something your father never could, a kingdom that functions. What you do with it after I'm gone is your problem.
but you'll think of me every time you make a decision, every time you hesitate, every time you wonder if you're choosing correctly. I'll be there, not as a memory, but a framework you can't escape." He dies the next morning, peacefully, surrounded by physicians and guards. Canute buries him with military honors, commissions a statue, declares a week of mourning, does everything a king should do for a loyal advisor. Then he returns to the strategy room, sits at the table that Askeladd used to sit at, and tries to make his first independent decision in 7 years. He stares at the maps for 3 hours, doesn't write single order. Because Askeladd was right. The framework remains. The dependency is permanent. And Canute finally understands the cruelest truth about power. That sometimes the cage isn't built from bars and chains. It's built from competence you can no longer replicate. From wisdom you never developed because someone else was always there to provide it. Askeladd never died in the throne room. So he never became a martyr, never became a catalyst for Canute's transformation. He just became indispensable. And in doing so, he achieved something far worse than any battlefield victory. He made a king who could never truly rule. History remembers heroes and villains. It remembers martyrs, kings, and wars that reshaped the world. But it rarely remembers the men who ruled without crowns, the ones who never sat on the throne, yet decided who could. Askeladd was never meant to be a symbol, never a legend carved into stone. He was something far more dangerous, a mind that outlived its body. In this world, he didn't die to inspire a king. He lived long enough to hollow one out. And Canute? He ruled an empire that looked powerful from the outside, but inside, every decision echoed with a voice that was no longer there. Because some ghosts don't haunt castles, they haunt choices. And when a man builds a kingdom on borrowed wisdom, he never truly owns the crown. This was the world where Askeladd never died. A world where victory came at the cost of freedom. A world where the greatest prison was the mind of a king who could no longer think for himself. See you in the next paradox.